Good to know. There we go. All right. So really appreciate the opportunity to do that. Okay.
Carry on.
No, it's like very long game prank. Okay, and it's someone's chatting.
We're good. Just putting the code in.
Okay, sorry. All right, we're back. Good. Okay, this is me. I don't have any disclosures except for this. I really would like to have disclosures. I'd be like, I get paid $1 billion to do this. So I'm very sorry. I mean, that'd be a great disclosure, but I don't have it. So today, one of the things I've done this sort of presentation a couple of times, but one of the things I changed today is I'd actually like to dedicate this to my great uncle, Dr. Renee Crichlow, who took care of patients in this area for about 55 years. He started as a resident in 1960 in Pitt, and he is someone who anyone who has no T in their name and is Crichlow related, but he's my great uncle, and you take it.
I have inherited an entire Crichlow team of patients.
There you go. Yeah, we're beloved, so that thing happens. So he's an amazing guy, and I knew him when I was very small. It's one of those things when you grow up and you're like, oh wow. He worked with Dr. Salk in his virology lab after the vaccine, but anyway, dedicated to Dr. Crichlow. That one, not this one. So learning objectives today, basically, the objective today is to help you realize that we've done really amazing things in this world, and that didn't happen by accident. And it's important for us to remember that right now, because a lot of amazing things need to happen. And the people in this room are the people that are going to help that happen. And if you don't believe that, then get the fuck out. No, don't believe that, and maybe you'll believe it after today. So I think one of the most important things for a lot of people that understand is we're humans. And humans, we work best in community. We work best when we eat and share stories. In fact, that is how you create a culture, is you share stories and you eat food together. So while you're eating food today, we're going to share some stories. A lot of the stories that are going on right now are terrifying. We still have to engage with them. What is it? Someone said, history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. And that's sort of where we are. We're in a rhyming time in history. My family, that old curse of may you live in interesting times. Like, I don't want it to be so interesting. So sometimes my wife will send me off to work and she'll be like, have a boring day, honey. I'm like, you have a boring day too, sweetie. So it was funny because we weren't married before the pandemic, and I did most of my pandemic work was in the hospitals, and I would drive to work, and we were in a long distance relationship, and she would drive with me. So I'd call her, and she'd always say that it was because she wanted to say hi in the morning. So, but it was actually because she's a lawyer and she didn't want me to get stopped by the cops without having someone there. And as an essential worker driving in Minneapolis, the roads were empty, especially in the first few months. And she would always, I'd get out and I'd say, I'm at work, I park my car, and she'd always say, what do we say to the God of death? And I said, not today, motherfucker. She's like, okay, have a good day. Stories we tell. So right now, we are living in very, very interesting times. And the thing is that we have to realize is we just have to take it from where we are. So one of my favorite phrases from Arthur Ashe, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. These pictures are from the time of the pandemic. As you know, I was in Minneapolis, and our clinic was 5 miles away from where George Floyd was murdered. And when that happened, there was significant chaos in the neighborhood that we took care of. We're in North Minneapolis, which apparently is a lot like, I was like, what's the poorest area in Pittsburgh? And they're like, you're in it right now. So Minneapolis at the time of George Floyd's murder, there were lots of riots, there were lots of protests. Everyone always likes to remember Martin Luther King when he talks about, content of the character, but they often don't quote him when he's talking about riots. He said riots are the language of the voice of the unheard. And so a lot of those destructive behaviors that took place were because people were very unheard. Our clinic was on a street that 5 different buildings were burned. We were ransacked. They attempted to burn us, but it was actually flooded instead. And we had to pivot to full telehealth within like 20 minutes because the next day it was impossible to bring patients in. And that picture on your right is me the Friday night of the week George Floyd was murdered. I was on call at our hospital in North Minneapolis. And it was back when the Twitter was a thing. And I went on the Twitter and I was like, hey, everyone, be safe out there, because it was the first Friday of the protests and we knew it was probably going to be very big. And said, hey, everybody, be safe out there. We're Broadway docs and we care about our clinic's Broadway Family Medicine. And someone comes on, one of the activists comes on and is like, what do you people do there? And I'm like, on call, I'm like waiting. I got a lady that's dilating. And I'm like, oh, but this is a good investment in time right now. I was like, we're Broadway Family Medicine. We've been in North Minneapolis for the last 45 years. We deliver the babies in the community. We take care of the kids. We take care of the moms. We take care of your grandparents. We take care of you. We're family medicine. And we've been here for 45 years. And he tweets back, he says, nobody burns Broadway. And there were people like standing in front of our clinic that night. They were guarding the cafe and they were guarding our clinic. And no one burned Broadway that night. And it was not because we asked nicely, it was because they heard that we were part of the community and that we had not just shown up, we'd always shown up. So sometimes you just have to be a little still and deal with all this stuff. So, stories. There's a thread you follow. It goes among the things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. So this is a poem by a doctor, William Stafford. And you're not allowed to rename other people's poems. He calls it The Way It Is. I would call it purpose, because that thread is your purpose. And it allows you to go through things that you don't think you could go through. So, believe you can is the first necessary action. You don't believe it, it's not going to happen. Courage is the queen of virtues, because without courage, you can't do any of the other virtues. So, believe you can is the first necessary action. And we're going to talk about stories of systems change. And the reason we're going to talk about stories of systems change is because stories are how we build the culture we want to share. And one of the things that's really challenging to me is people saying things like, it's always been this way, it's never going to change. That's the way it is. And I remember I was that person when I was a young little phlebotomist. I mean, some of you have heard this story. But I remember talking to some older, short-haired Black woman doctor, and I was like, things never change. Nothing's ever been solved. And she's like, sit down, child. And she talked to me about the community health, federally qualified community health system. She talked to me about how, and this was in the late 80s. She talked to me about how, we'd engage with all these different, she talked to me about the Great Society and LVJ. And I was like, maybe some things, but come to investigate, come to live and realize that, yeah, we have the power to make these things happen. So raise your hand if you're Gen X. Raise your hand if you're Gen X. There you go. Or no, okay, good. I can adjust my conversation based on that. So within the Gen X lifetime, we have reduced extreme poverty. Can anyone make that top thing go away?
Sophia, can you do it?
Anyway, well, so it says extreme poverty rate.
Willing to try.
Yeah, it's like, does this ever just go smaller?
Be a high.
High floating
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
there, okay, I got it.
High something. Oh, wait, there's more.
All right, good. Okay, there you go.
This is Barry talking.
It's not personal, Barry. So extreme poverty rate from 1800 to today. That sounds like a very long time, but the fact is between 1966 and 2017, it went from 50% to 9%. That is my lifetime. I mean, not the whole of it, but within our lifetimes, it took poverty down like that. And it wasn't because of war on poverty or anything like that. It was because of systemic changes and economic changes, and it was because systems were not receiving the same inputs and feedback. Within my lifetime, extreme poverty in this world has dropped that much. So, stories we tell shape the world we create. Other things that have worked. This was killing of whales. So Gen X, another thing we remember is Greenpeace. Greenpeace, they're on their Zodiac boats. They're going in front of the whaler boats. They're like, stop whaling, all this kind of stuff. Great. Raised a lot of consciousness. It wasn't what brought the killing of whales down to this level. It was the fact that laws were made. But laws were being able to be made because of technological changes. We didn't really need the whales anymore. We didn't need the products of the whales anymore. So then people gloriously got conscious and realized, no, we should not kill the whale. So there were systemic technological changes. And as a result of that, the industry became vulnerable and was not able to stop these laws from happening. And our lifetime goes from a peak to nothing, practically. Start sneaking up again. But stories we tell, build the culture we want to build. Number of whales killed brought almost to nothing. Ozone. This is one of the things where when you're a Gen Xer, you realize how weird our life has been. So there used to be a big old, what was it in the ozone? Yeah, there was a hole in the ozone, letting all the bad things through that was going to, cancer-causing, death-defying rays, all this stuff. Very bad. So what happened? Right around when I was in residency, they outlawed the volatiles that contributed to the ozone depletion. And we went from having MDI inhalers to HCF inhalers. That's for the pharmacists out there. Love you guys. Where are you, Jeff? There you go, guys. So why was that able to happen? Honestly, science came up and said it's bad. No. Industry came up and said, well, we can make a lot of money if we switch over to the different kind of volatiles, because then we have a whole new industry. Because guess what? All those other things are off patent. All the ones that were making big holes in the ozone were off patent. So they're like, sure, make a law. This is the thing. Economic pressures can help make changes, or they can be barriers to changes. So finding out what the economic pressures are is a huge part of facilitating change. Ozone depletion correction was addressed because there were economic pressures for folks who can make money. It finally worked in our direction once. But we don't hear about the hole anymore. Lead. So lead, good or bad for babies? Just want to like gauge the crowd. Okay. Last time I actually did this talk in Michigan at the beginning of summer. And when you're talking about lead in children in Michigan, there's always someone in the room who has worked in Flint. And the kind of, the kind of perverse incentives that were put in place to make Flint happen, that is a policy study of its own. So, but if you look at both globally and in the United States, we made huge changes in the way that lead lead concentration in children. And one of the biggest ones was, once again, Gen X. When we were growing up, you went to fill up your gas, you had to choose between what? Yeah, leaded and unleaded. I don't even know why they put unleaded now, because people are like, that's just gas now. Yeah, but Gen X, we were also the folks who were like, seatbelts, those are cute. But getting lead out of the gasoline also got lead out of the areas where cars drove through. It's one of the hugest impacts, getting lead out of paint. That was a fight. Like, it was like industry is like, well, just don't eat the paint. Like, nope, how about we just remove the toxin from the environment where the children are developing? Crazy talk. But things happened, people were able to make this change, and it wasn't overnight, and it took multiple layers. Lead, gasoline, all of the things had to be done at local, state, and federal level, but it got done. Nothing is fixed, and most things are fixable. This is one of the big take-homes. And one of the areas I want to be really clear on is if you want to make systemic changes, you need to understand who's been marginalized by the current system. Who's been marginalized by the current system? Because if you look at the margins and you're able to center your changes, your structural changes, so that the folks at the margins improve, guess what? It improves it for everybody. That is one of the coolest things about systemic approaches, is centering at the margins, adjusting structural change so those at the margins improves the system for everybody. You good? You good? Okay, good. I was centering at the margins.
Thank you.
So nothing is fixed. Most things are fixable. Syphilis. I know you're going to get tired of hearing this, but oh my God, Gen X, when we were in medical school, you always had to put syphilis in the differential diagnosis because it was called the Great Masquerader or something like that. Then your professors would be like, I've never even seen syphilis. I don't even know why we do that. Yeah, except for the fact that, that 5 years ago when I left Minnesota, we had to change the prenatal care protocols so that you tested 3 times. Because the year I left, there were 5 congenital syphilis cases in Minnesota. Yeah, we used to be way over here. That literally was when I was in residency in medical school. I've never even heard of it. I don't know. There was this was HIV and AIDS contributing to that. But we got it down. Boom. I wonder, then when you're looking here at the prevalence and incidence and cases. I wonder if you can determine which areas of the country have a greater public health infrastructure. Yeah. And the thing is, if something is out of control in one part of this country, public health wise, does it stay in that part of the country? No, it doesn't stay there. Doesn't matter how good your public health infrastructure is if your neighbors aren't good. Syphilis was well on the way to being very well controlled, and those days are over. We have to recapture our ability to deal with syphilis. Another thing, smog. This is LA. This is LA in the late 60s, or as we like to call it then, the Pre-Environmental Protection Act. There are mountains there. Yeah, so when I was a little kid, again, this may be the last time I say Gen X, unlikely. When I was a little kid, you would watch Johnny Carson's show, which took place in LA, and they'd always like, the smog today. And like growing up in Oklahoma, you're like, hee, there's smog. I didn't know what it was, but it sounded bad. Yeah, this is what smog before the EPA came in place. And then, boom, you could start seeing things. It was literally 1973 was when the act happened. We got to the point where you could see both the cityscape and the mountains. But right now, we're at a stage where we're getting back to smog in LA. And it's not because of industry as much anymore, as much as smoke from climate change. So all things are fixable, but they won't stay fixed. We've done things great even at a global level. We've done big global changes. I know that's really hard for the younger folks to think about in this room. The idea that globally we would make an international effort to make something better for all of the citizens of this planet. We did it. Anyone know what this is? I'll give you a hint. It's the largest virus, and you can see it under a microscope with your plain eye.
CMV.
Smallpox. There you go. Like that. Just keep going. Yeah, so it's smallpox. And in what they used to call a virgin field, in a virgin field, you can have anywhere from 80 to 90% morbidity and mortality from smallpox. Smallpox was kicking our butt since, early Egyptian times, beyond that. That's when they first started recording and stuff. But, basically, when smallpox got dropped off in the Americas, beyond decimation. Smallpox was just a standard that people had to deal with. All of those old, beauty marks and those old pictures, a lot of them were just filling in the smallpox scar of the person who survived. And smallpox was not subtle, even if you survived it. But the qualities of smallpox allowed us to make a global effort to eradicate it. Qualities like a very short incubation period. So that versus HIV and AIDS. No animal reservoirs. Be terrifying if a mosquito could carry that. It'd be a very big mosquito. And high morbidity and mortality. This thing looks scary because it is scary. And the mode of transmission, you had to be in contact. We made a very effective vaccine. Now, I have the scar. So either if you're born in the United States, I was in 1967. If you're born in 1967, it's unlikely you have it unless you went traveling, because it was one of the things you had to have to travel, your travel disease. But it's super effective. And it's the one that leaves that mine looks sort of like an eye. And so when I was going to college in Santa Cruz in the 90s, people are like, dude, cool scarification. I'm like, yeah, public health gave it to me. And also the very cool thing about the way you can vaccinate around smallpox is you can do what's called ring vaccination. What's your name? Daniel. So let's say Daniel, unbeknownst to us, has smallpox. So Greg gets a call tomorrow and it's like, Daniel had smallpox. We need a list of everybody that was in the room. You still have time to vaccinate everyone in this room before they would get it. It's a ring vaccine strategy. And there's not a lot of vaccines we have that work that way. But that's one of the coolest things about, that's one of the cool things about smallpox. If you use that ring vaccine approach. So proactive, prospective public health vaccination, then reactive acute care ring vaccination. Globally, we went after this. Public health efforts in every single country and supported by all the major economies because they know if we could get rid of this, then we would never have to worry about it again. This guy, the 1977 next to him, that gentleman was the last gentleman ever to have wild type smallpox. And it's an interesting story. He was a vaccine public health worker, and he was basically walking back to the vaccine headquarters, and a family drove up, and they're like, "Hey, where's the clinic?" And he's like, "Oh, it's over there. I'm going that way. I'll go with you and make sure you get there." So he hops in the car, and they're driving. It's like, "So, what do you need? Why do you want to go to the clinic?" And he's like, "Oh, our kids have smallpox." It's like, cool. So he got smallpox, but he was the last person to have wild type smallpox in the world. And I keep knocking on wood for a very important reason that I'll get to. The last person to have and die of smallpox is a British lady in England, where British ladies often live. It was in 1978, and she died of smallpox because smallpox was coincident to that, smallpox was in.
Sorry, that was me.
That was you, okay. Smallpox was in a building on the campus where she'd worked, the medical school campus, and she contracted it and died. She supposedly had never been to that building. And there is a Netflix movie waiting to happen. Because also the person who ran the lab, I believe, committed suicide as a result of this sort of kerfluffles that came up about this. So if there's any screenwriters in the room, please, I want to see this movie. But she was the last person to die. And in 1980, it was announced, the World Health Association said, we have eradicated smallpox, extirpated, meaning pulled out by the root. And smallpox only exists in this world in 2 laboratories right now. One is in Russia, and the other is the CDC. So that's why I keep doing that thing. I really want these to be the last 2 cases. But that kind of global effort, can you imagine that happening today? A long-term, concerted, focused, global effort that is multinational. So, systems change. How do we do it? Looking at the inputs and feedbacks is one of the most important ways that we shift complex systems. Remember we were talking about why the whaling was able to be intervened on? Well, it's because the technology. And so the input into whaling was very different. There was not the economic pressure that was there. And the technology changes weren't necessarily made in order to save the whales. But it allowed that to happen. Looking at what the inputs and feedbacks are the only way that we actually can shift systems. Does anyone know what this is called when birds do this?
Murmuration.
Who said that? There you go. Winner. It's called a murmuration. Remember when you like driving on a highway and you see the birds and they're doing all that stuff? And you're like, why are you doing that? And like every scientist that knows anything about it will say, well, we think. And you're like, okay, so you don't know. But one of the things that they have studied is apparently like the bird pays attention to like the 7 birds around them and responds to those 7 birds around them. That is a very complex adaptive system. So sometimes you can shift the whole system by responding to what's around you. And that's a critical thing to think about. What are the inputs and feedbacks that play into that? One of the ways that we can very, very clearly see to impact a system is by centering the structural changes on the most marginalized. And I'm going to give you what I think is my favorite, most profound example. And it's not just because I thought of it, but you know, it does help. Electricity in rural America. Electricity in rural America. Without electricity, that was life. This is an early infographic, 1921, and it shows the areas that are largest are the ones that have the most concentration of electricity access. Good job, Pennsylvania. Okay. But look at all these other places. It's Montana, where I used to live. Oklahoma. In the 1930s, only 11% of rural America had electricity. 11% of people, once the night comes, you had no real ability to do things like study, work. You know, what's your industry going to look like? What's your education going to look like? What's your economy look like? So FDR, smart guy, decides, he's like, we got to get electricity into rural America. He's like, I got a great idea. Let's go up to those electrical companies. They're like, hey, electrical company, you're cool. Like what you did in Pennsylvania. That looks good. How about we get some electrical generating plants out in rural America? And love that whole private industry thing. So what do you think the private industry said? No, why did they say no? Yeah, what was that? There's no money in that. It's like, that's cute how you think I'm going to build a plant and run it out to something and I'm not going to make any money on that. And FDR is like, okay, I hear you. I hear that. So as a government, what can we do? They set up what's called the Rural Electrification Act. And the Rural Electrification Act is basically any small rural town, any rural town, doesn't matter what size it is, any rural town that does not have electricity can develop a cooperative. That cooperative can apply and they will receive training, consulting, and extreme low interest loans to build an electrical generating co-op to provide also the infrastructure for that electricity to get out to industry and the towns. Oh, and if your farmhouse, your house doesn't have electricity, you can also have low interest, long-term loans to get electrical infrastructure put to your house. And no. You can have those. No, it's like, I want electricity. No, clearly you have teams, you already have electricity. So think about that. These long-term low-interest loans that did not have any personal capital that needed to be in place. Like no, if they never paid back the loans, no person would be held accountable for it. Beyond the vast majority, almost all the loans were paid back. Let's just be really clear. But the access to capital was provided by our government to fix a problem for the marginalized communities. They provided not just the money, the consulting and support to make it happen. And oh, what happens when you get electricity in your house? What do you have to do? How are you going to read at night? Got to buy a lamp, don't you? You think those lamps were made in rural America? No. The money that was spent on getting the infrastructure built created a new economic area, for a new era for the United States. Every dollar that they put in, within 5 years, the economy was receiving $4 or $5 from that dollar. Because guess what? I have electricity now. You know what? I'm going to get an electrical milking machine. I'm going to buy, oh, not one, I'm going to buy 4 lamps for this house because that's how much I love my family. I'm going to buy an electric dishwasher. Nah, they didn't do that. They did clothes washers. But spending and investing at the margins grew our economy. There's people who, like I said, the first 5 years, they're already getting, $4 for every $1 spent. The people who believe that there's been trillions of dollars that are the result of us getting electricity into rural America. The town I lived in Montana, Red Lodge, is still powered by a co-op that was paid for through the REA. So many things were able to happen. And by the 1960s, over 95% of rural America had electricity. Looks like you guys got a few too, Pennsylvania. So real equity is putting resources where they're needed the most. And when you do that, you improve the system for everybody. This is why I don't use the people standing on baseball crates looking over a fence when I'm talking about equity. Equity, when it's done right, is a lens for excellence. You look at your system with the lens of equity and you say, what do we need to do to make this system better? You look at the margins and you create an infrastructure that will support their excellence. You do that, it shifts the system for everybody. So we can make excuses or we can make changes, but we can't do both. Successful systemic change. Understand the need for action. One of the things, the smallpox one's really good. Understanding the need, you're like, oh my God, did you see that picture? Collaborative and multifocal approaches. Linear, single point of change always has adverse and unintended consequences. That is a guarantee. You have to, I always say, if you're going to pick up a watermelon seed, you can sort of do it with one finger if you sort of press and it's sticky. You've laughed at every joke. You are coming with me. But if you really want to pick up that watermelon seed, you have to approach it from a couple of sides. Do that little pincer move. And guess what? You're actually using 3 sides because the table you're pulling it off is another side. So multifocal approaches are critical. Looking for systemic changes, building infrastructures. No single leadership is a single point of failure. Persistence, iterative, adaptive. All of these things are very important. And really reason the importance of sustaining efforts. If I must point to syphilis, I will continue to point to syphilis. Sustaining efforts are critical. So, these offers insights into how societal level challenges can be successfully addressed and corrected. Change the inputs, change the feedbacks. Now let's talk about current policy landscape. Everyone's eaten, so So is this what you'd call an easy time? Not so much. It's a challenging time, that is for sure. Do you have any Game of Thrones fans? Wow, they're fanatics, in fact. So he was a very mean and horrible character, but he was wise in some ways. Littlefinger, one of the things that he said that I often quote, which I don't want to sound nefarious, but it's accurate. Chaos is a ladder. When things are chaotic, when things are, quote, out of control, if you have an idea, if you have people that believe in you, you actually can be a nidus for significant change. Very small changes can have massive impacts in chaotic systems. Chaos is a ladder. Our current policy landscape, number one, I'm very happy that democracy worked yesterday, big fan. And when I say worked, I don't even care about who won. The fact that we had elections and people went, and then people reported on things. That is democracy in action. Participation, conversation, communication right now is so important. And I know it's really scary. What's my timing like, Greg? When do I end?
15 minutes.
15 or, yeah.
15 minutes, got it. Okay, good. Good. So, right now, this chaos, this is our ladder. You guys all have an idea of what you think healthcare should look like. Getting involved right now is a really, really important time. I don't know if there's any rugby players beside myself in the room, but there's a thing in rugby where it's called a ruck, and you sort of bind on and you push together. And there is a time and place. It's not the scrum, it's the ruck. It's totally different. There's a time when you need to bind on and put your weight behind something, and there's the time when you need to be the first person to show up in the ruck. So there's going to be something that who was asking me something about, someone said, what should we do now? And I'm like, be curious. Be curious, do a lot of sampling, get out. Do curious, yes. Yeah, be curious, find out what people are doing right now. See where you might want to be connected. For those in family medicine, we have the American Academy of Family Physicians. You have the state chapter of Pennsylvania Academy of Family Physicians. And know you have state advocacy days. There's federal advocacy days. The federal Family Medicine Advocacy Summit is every spring. And there's a ton of different ways where you can learn how to engage. And that's the biggest thing, is learning how to engage. Because you don't have to solve any of these things yourself. There's a lot of people doing stuff. But you have to realize that things can change. And you have to actually believe that things can change. And a big demonstration of why we need to do that is because this is the kind of mess that we're in. We've made a little rebound with life expectancy since this data was put up. But the fact is, what we have in this country is a crisis. We have a crisis of deaths of despair, overdoses, suicides are seriously impacting our long-term longevity, the chronic illnesses, the failure of public health. And when I mean failure, I mean the abandonment of public health. But look at what we've done. If you look at this over here, this is the various causes of death. This is causes of death for children was motor vehicle accidents. Leading cause, very long time, motor vehicle accidents. In fact, back to the Gen X thing, when we were kids, we had those little seat belts were actually belts, basically. And if you had 4 kids in the back seat, 2 of them get to live. If you had a baby, do you guys remember what they used to do with the baby? You sort of lay it down behind the passenger seat. Stay safe, little baby. Now we have car seats. We have the cross-diagonal belts. Because we've done things like airbags and car seats and diagonal belts, we have brought motor vehicle crashes down so far that guess what? Kills kids more now than motor vehicle accidents. one of the least regulated things we have. Yeah, guns. Anyone who says regulation doesn't work, grab this graph and just show it to them. That's how many kids used to die. This is where it is now. It's less than gun deaths. The next picture is a little depressing and a little triggering, so I apologize. But I think it's necessary. This is from Uvalde. And you remember when they were like showing the videos and stuff? Editor's note, the sound of children screaming has been removed. I'm not sure they should have removed it. Maybe if it looked as scary as smallpox. That to me is as scary as smallpox. This is also scary. The system's not working for anybody. This is 2019 data. 2023 data is not that different. System's not working for anybody. 18,000 white male suicides by gun deaths. This is leading suicide gun deaths is in white males. 18,000. And then there's 6,000 black on black homicides, because whenever I talk about crime, people are always like, black on black crime. I was like, that sounds, but this is the thing. These are both deaths of despair. These are deaths of despair. The system is not working for anybody. Anybody who thinks it is either manipulating people or lying to themselves. So, key take-home points. Stories we tell shape the world we create. Believe you can's first necessary action, centering structural change in the most marginalized, shifts the system for all. Nothing is fixed, most things are fixable. So, story. I was, for those of you who were there here at the early morning thing, you know, my backstory, I was a young college dropout. I was a phlebotomist at a HIV AIDS clinic in the late 80s. We only had one drug to treat with, and that was AZT. I was young, black, dropout, lesbian, masculine presenting in a world where that was not considered good, and most of that was considered a threat. And I remember the first time someone spit on me and called me a dyke. I was at Harvard. Now I teach at Harvard. But I also remember what it was like moving in that environment, living in that environment. I lived in Boston at that time, and Boston has a transit system called the T, and we would take the T to go to the Gay Pride celebration. Gay Pride celebration was be on the Commons, which is sort of in the middle of town. So you'd start way out where you could afford the rent, and you'd get on the T, and I'd get on with my girlfriend at the time, and we wouldn't sit close or touch hands or anything like that, because that could invite violence. And but as you got closer to the Commons, more and more people would get on who were going Gay Pride. And there was this weird sort of moment where there was sort of this emergent property of safety, where you looked around and you realized that you could probably touch your girlfriend's hand and then sit closer. And then you get closer and closer, more and more people, and then you give a little kiss in public. Ooh. And you get off the T in the Commons, and it would just be filled with LGBTQ plus. We didn't even have good letters back then. We were just Gay Pride. And the whole day was like a picnic with like your best, most chosen family, and you felt super safe. You held hands, you walked around, you ate food, so good. And since we were like 19 and not old enough to go to the clubs, we had to get back on the T and go back home. And get back on the T, and there'd be this thing where you realized, okay, this is awesome. This has been a great day. And then you'd look around and you realize you're getting further and further away from the Commons. And you'd have to let go of the hand, and you'd have to scoot a little further apart. And eventually you'd get to your neighborhood and you'd get off the T. And when you got off the T, you looked around to make sure no one was following you, who might mean you harm. And then you walked home and you went back to that world where both the laws and the mores were designed to oppress you. And that was in the late 80s. And a lot of people thought that HIV and AIDS would completely destroy the gay community. It was decimating gay men. A generation were lost to it. They were convinced that the LGBTQ plus community would just dissolve, it would be gone. But we didn't go away. We worked together, we supported each other, and like one potluck at a time, we organized. We did policy work. People marched in the streets. People got law degrees. People worked on campaigns. People kept doing the work. Nowadays, pharmacists here, how many drugs do we have to treat HIV? We have so many drugs to treat HIV. It's no longer a death sentence. It's a chronic illness, and we're almost at the point where we were going to get a vaccine against it to eradicate it. You know, marriage equality, I'm happily married. I like marriage so much, this is my second one. I'm happily married. We have kids, 2 of them are adopted. One of them came right out of there, actually section more like right there. And all of that happened because we never stopped doing the work. We engaged with the challenge. We did not let it slow us down. We didn't let it stop us. Those are the kinds of things that you need to realize. Every story that we told over those potlucks helped me get to where I am today. And we are living in very interesting, challenging times. But we're in healthcare. We got to keep doing the work. And part of that work is amplifying the voices of our community. Because, as I said, you know, things can be fixed, but not everything's fixable. Marriage equality is actually up in the gun sites. What do we call them? There's a lot of things that are going on that continue to need to be engaged with. But we've done great things, and we can't forget that. And it's critical that we tell the stories about what we've done well and how we did it. I don't have time to play this one. Or I do, yeah. See?
Will it work? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see.
I moved up here for IT support.
No, I love that.
Not saying I can, but I'm big. It's a good fun.
Okay, so that is the ladder, and make the slide come back. That's the ladder, and we started it in 2012, and it was a real important part of in Minnesota was basically consistently battling with Utah as the whitest medical school. And they switch off 1 and 2 for many, many years. And I remember when I moved there, there was a Black medical student who came up to me and she's like, none of the people live in North Minneapolis that are in school here. And I was like, let's see what we can do about that. So we started the ladder, and I will tell you that Aisha is she's definitely one of those things that makes you look good, because she started out as a high school student, and she's in her last year as pathology resident right now. And her sister is a nurse. And I'll tell you, that infectious disease thing happened because I was like, what are we going to do next month? Well, that's a great idea. Perfect. No, this is good. This is good, because then we have the thing we want to do. So, like, all that to say that, those are the kinds of things. Oh, sorry, you can't go into Google. Okay. Last part. So, I probably need to just see the desktop.
Come here, come here.
Yeah, and then my PDF is somewhere.
Yeah, it's somewhere.
Yeah, so find it and find it. Over. Here you go. So all that to say is, like, these are the kinds of things that we did because we couldn't find one way to fix things. There was not one way to fix things. And the biggest thing we did was create community. And that was something that outlasted almost everything. Excellent. That community that we were able to create was what gave us the opportunity. And this is what I call the ladder in one picture. So at 1 o'clock, the young man, he started out as a med student with us. He is a pediatrician now. At about 4 o'clock, that is Dr. Manel Vananton. She is an MD, PhD. You'll notice that at like 7 o'clock, that's one of our 9-year-olds. Above her is one of our undergrads. And if you look on the table, that patient is Dr. Nanton's continuity patient who volunteered to come to the ladder on our baby day. And I want you to look at that trust, that contact. This is the ladder in one picture. It has every stage, because I'll tell you that the medical students felt supported. The residents they're like, it's like the gym. You don't want to go, but then you go and you feel really good. I had community doctors that are like, if you stop the ladder, I will kill you in your sleep. This is the only thing that's reminded me why I got into medicine. And the young lady that was an undergrad there, she's a PA now. So that's the ladder in one picture. So wrapping things up, do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. These are challenging times. We've been through challenging times before. I hope you have a boring day. Our other family motto is hard times, good people. And you guys are excellent. You're up to this. So thank you.
We'll have some time for questions, and then we'll split up for the next thing.
The voices you heard from my phone before were me trying to log in to see if people had questions in Zoom, and then it blew everything up. So I'm going to do that while you maybe field some questions from the audience.